Welcome back to The Weekend. Just 10 days before he begins his second term as president, Donald Trump will be sentenced on 34 guilty counts of falsifying business records, all part of his effort to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Now, Trump has the option of appearing in person or virtually for this sentencing, and Judge Merchan has said he won't order Trump to face any jail time. That bombshell decision from Merchan wasn't the only legal blow for Trump last week. A federal appeals court also upheld E. Jean Carroll's $5 million civil judgment, which a jury awarded Carroll after it found Trump liable for sexually abusing her in the 1990s and then defaming her after she went public with her allegations. Joining us now is Mary McCord, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice. She is also the co-host of one of the best podcasts in the game, the Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast, and an MSNBC legal analyst.
Mary McCord, good morning to you. I want to try to connect the dots between what we have been watching, the legal developments around Trump, and also what we saw just yesterday with Trump inviting a number of people who were big parts of the lead up to January 6th to celebrate them at the White House around this Eastman Dilemma documentary. This is a part of the trailer. Let's watch it, and then let's talk about it on the other side.
He asked me to help design a strategy. One could not have predicted that that would subject me to years of lawfare, but I thought it was important to do and to take on that representation.
Was it worth it?
Distorting laws that have been on the books for a long time to find people we don't like because they're saying things that we don't like, and then to use those criminal laws to go after them. That's lawfare on steroids.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to play that clip, Mary, is that this is what they are selling to their base, right? They are selling the idea that Democrats are the ones weaponizing the law in order to come after Republicans. Talk us through the reality of what it is that we are watching, both this celebration at Mar-a-Lago and this ruling from Judge Merchan.
Well, it's really rich, I think, for John Eastman to talk about lawfare when the entire scheme, the fraudulent electors scheme, hatched originally by Kenneth Chesebro and James Trupis, who were then able to get it to the White House when Mr. Trump was in the White House and get it to people like John Eastman, who continued to promote it. That was lawfare, right? That was trying to concoct a legal argument, dubious as it was, in order to support an effort to send the electoral ballots from the swing states, the losing candidate, Donald Trump, in 2020, in order to send those electoral ballots to Capitol Hill to be counted on January 6th. We are at the 4-year anniversary tomorrow of January 6th. And to, even in the words of those who concocted this scheme, to throw things into chaos so that if no candidate had a majority of the vote, then the House would vote, and the House votes 1 vote per state. That would throw the election to Trump. So to talk about lawfare, that's exactly what John Eastman engaged in. But to bring this all together, this celebration of those who took part in the lead up to January 6th, I think is really just sort of the culmination of 4 years of disinformation about what happened on January 6th, disinformation about the efforts to overturn the results of the will of the people. And whether that's priming the pump for something that we're going to see in the next 4 years remains to be seen, but it shows this constant pushback against reality and using terms like John Eastman used, like lawfare, to try to flip the tables, turn the tables, and show that actual legitimate adherence to the rule of law by prosecutors and, importantly, by judges, to bring back your point about Judge Merchan, they're just trying to flip that script.
The thing that strikes me in all of this, from Donald Trump to Rudy Giuliani to Eastman and all the crap that we hear from these people, is that they sound no different than the petty criminal that Rudy Giuliani used to prosecute, who would stand in front of a reporter or a bank of cameras or a judge and claim his innocence and say how the law was being used against them and all this other stuff. And prosecutors like Rudy Giuliani back in the day would just look at them and go, yeah, okay, right. Let me tell you, we uphold the rule of law. So it's interesting and very rich to hear Rudy Giuliani on the Merchan decision on Friday say this. The case is a disaster. It's an embarrassment for New York. It's an embarrassment for Bragg. Maybe his worst embarrassment given all the people he killed as a result of his incompetence as DA. But the case should have never been charged, should have been dismissed for failure to state a crime, should have been dismissed on the theory that you don't have multiple choice verdict. You got convicted. You owe a lot of money to people that you defamed, right?
He had to give up his cars and his
Give
watches
up your cars, up your watches,
to Shane
baby,
Moss
your
and his
apartment, right? That wasn't the judge just sort of randomly picking you out. That wasn't the judge using the rule of law against you or the creation of lawfare and whatever the hell that means, you know. Explain to folks this sort of disinformation of the law, around the law, that, you know, these very same individuals like Rudy and Eastman once stood on the right side of. Now, because they have engaged in criminal behavior, they have the advantage of twisting the system in a way that the criminals they once prosecuted couldn't.
Yeah, and this is the trend that we're seeing, and this is that attack on the rule of the law. It's some of what the Chief Justice was talking about in his end-of-the-year report about the independence of the judiciary is under threat, and it's under threat not only because of violence and intimidation, but also disinformation and proposals to ignore judicial rulings. And Rudy Giuliani did exactly that, right? He had rulings on his liability with amounts set about what he owed Ruby Freeman and Shane Moss for defaming them and really damaging them, injuring them, right? They got death threats. They had to move. They had to move, right? Actual monetary damage as well as emotional damage. And yet he is defying the court orders to divulge his assets. He's hiding things. He just was at a hearing Friday that's continuing tomorrow about whether he should be in contempt for failing to actually produce the assets that he needs to produce in order to fulfill that judgment. That is exactly what the Chief Justice was talking about in his message, this defiance of judicial orders, defiance of the rule of law. And we are in a very dangerous situation when it comes to the rule of law, when between disinformation and people in positions of power, right, elected officials, are actually espousing the idea of ignoring court rulings. We might disagree with court rulings. I often do. Sometimes I think they're right. Sometimes I think they're wrong. But if we get to a point in this country where we don't abide by those rulings, then we have really lost a critical piece of what keeps this a functioning democracy.
I mean, to put a finer point on it, because I think what Mary, what you and Michael have identified is, that's, what will Michael say? That's the rub. That's the nut right there. That's the crux of it. Because I remember when the Dobbs decision came down, right? And there were some people, Democrats disproportionately, who said, well, the Biden administration should ignore what the Supreme Court said. And Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, got questions about it at the podium. And she's like, and she said that the president, while he disagrees with the ruling, he respects that the Supreme Court has this authority. And there are people out there that will say, well, why? Hasn't the game changed? I do think the game has changed, but not in that respect. Because if we start ignoring the laws, like the laws are just agreements that we all have about this is how we operate. And if we start ignoring the laws, and if we allow the laws to be blatantly ignored and disregarded and discarded, there is nothing holding our society and things together. Now, laws can be changed. Sometimes laws are wrong. They used to be legal, segregation. Used to be legal to own people that look like Michael and I, right? Like, those were laws, and the laws were wrong, so we had to change them. And they needed to be challenged. But the answer is not just complete disregarding, but the incoming president of the United States of America, he believes that the answer is to disregard. He does not believe that the answer is to abide by.
I guess it depends on whether he likes the ruling or not, right? I mean, he certainly is in favor of the immunity ruling that was issued by the Supreme Court, and he deploys that in every possible way, including in civil cases that are pending against him. And, so I think he's very much picks and chooses the ruling he likes. But I do really hold out the hope that even Donald Trump and those around him will recognize that if you just blatantly defy what the courts say, that is going to take away one of our three branches of government.
I'm sitting there thinking, hold out the hope.
Mary, I have to. It's a new year.
The reality of the situation is that is not what they believe.
That's not what they believe. And that's certainly not what they're going to do. I think in a lot of ways, Alicia, we find ourselves, the legal community finds itself sitting here confronting a lot of things that, in many respects, it kind of allowed to happen. Allowing certain, particularly in the judicial side, and certainly when you look at the Department of Justice, I mean, actions that could have been taken 2-3 years ago, because of politics weren't. And so how much is politics going to continue to drive the behavior? We talked about the media before in the last segment. How much is that going to drive how our legal community and our justice system responds to what this administration does?
So, Mary, to bring us full circle, we have less than a minute left. In light of everything that Michael just laid out, put Merchan's ruling for us into context. Is this anything resembling accountability?
Well, given the circumstances, and clearly if you read his 18-page opinion, he believes he is doing what he can to uphold the rule of law and, in particular, the jury's verdict. He emphasizes more than once in that decision that this was a jury of 12 individuals who were chosen, who sat through the weeks of evidence and rendered their verdict, and that verdict must be respected. He recognizes that because of the Supremacy Clause and because of separation of powers and federalism concerns and the executive's power as presidency, that a sitting president cannot serve a sentence of incarceration. He recognizes that, but he wants to have a sentencing and have a finality to this case and